All right, welcome to lesson 5 of your first podcast episode of Crash Course. In this lesson, we are going to talk about how to record your podcast. Again, the whole point of this course is to help you record and produce your first podcast. So the first thing that you need to do is put together a script. Now, there are different ways that you can create a script for your podcast. The first way, which is sometimes the easier way for people, is to create a script that you will read verbatim. With this script method, you're pretty much just going to sit down and read what you wrote, which is absolutely and perfectly fine if that's something that you need to do. This can be a little robotic depending on how you read, but this can be an easy way to get started and make sure you're saying all the things you'd like to say in your show. For a while, that's something that I did for my podcast. I would write out, say it was like a blog post or something, and then I would just sit down, read it, record it, and that would be my podcast. And it worked for me. It was comfortable and easy for me. And I would recommend that to anybody else, depending on your comfortability of speaking on the microphone and what you're trying to say and what you're trying to communicate in your podcast. The next script option is an outline. This, at this point in time, is my preferred method of preparing a script for your podcast. Using an outline can look like a series of bullet points or the simplified outline I've provided here. An outline script gives you room to interject and make up things on the spot. This typically creates a more authentic sound. So what I have here on the slide is a general outline. This is a general outline that I use, and I recommend that you use it too when preparing for your first podcast episode. Again, that's my recommendation. If you prefer to do a verbatim script, if that's easier for you, please, by all means, do what's easiest for you. We really want to make this podcasting process as easy and as simple as possible so that you can go and create your thing. So with this outline, we just start with an intro, then we have a middle, and then we have an outro. So the intro is where you welcome your audience to your show. Let them know who you are and provide a brief summary of what your show is about and what you plan on talking about in this episode. So here's an example of what I use for my podcast, Dude Make Something. Welcome to the Dude Make Something podcast, where we discuss mental health and how to use art and creativity to help you get to a healthier mental state. I'm your host, Jamiel Cal-Pin. In this episode, we'll discuss, and that's an intro that I use or I try to use for every episode, and it just helps frame and set up for the next part, which is the middle. Now, the middle, this is the meat of what you're sharing in this episode. Now, for the middle, you can have bullet points for what you want to discuss or talk about in your podcast. You can write out every little point that you want to get across, and then from there, as you're going through your outline, you can just weave it together however is most comfortable and easy flowing for you. Sometimes that's what I do for my podcast. Other times I just have a thought and an idea and I just start rambling. And that's perfectly fine as well. There are many podcasts where people just are really just shooting from the hip and sharing their thoughts. Again, do what's ever easiest for you. If you need to do the verbatim script, and if you need to write out all of your bullet points that you want to hit, do that. Do what's ever easiest for you. In the last part of this outline is the outro. This is where you wrap up your show. Remind folks of who you are, what show they were listening to, and also encourage them to check out your website or social media details. It's okay if you don't have a site, a website, or anything to share just yet, but keep in mind that this is something you should do in the future. And of course, thank them for listening. That's it. That's all you really need to do when prepping to record your podcast. Have a simple outline or put together a verbatim script for you to use. The script that I would recommend that you use is this simple outline: an intro, where you introduce the podcast and who you are and what you plan on talking about, the middle, where you discuss all of that, and then the outro, where you say thanks for listening to the show, you remind them of who you are, and remind them of the podcast that they were just listening to. That's all you really need to prepare for your podcast. In the next lesson, we're going to start to get into the more technical aspects of how you actually record your podcast. See you then.